stand by. In some case, the color first.
The views and opinions expressed during this live stream do not necessarily represent the views of Framing the World. Individuals are invited to be interviewed for their unique perspective on specific topics, and not because Framing the World agrees with or endorses all other areas of opinion. Listener discretion is advised.
All right, guys. Well, today is going to be another Answers in Creation episode. We are on episode 7. And, of course, we have Matt Powell in the house, and we also have Shane in the studio. So this is exciting. Joining us for his first ever episode of Answers in Creation. And we also have creation scientist Dr. Raw Matt. And so thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the program. And I got to be more specific. I can't just say Matt, or I'm going to have two people answer me during this episode. But I appreciate everyone tuning in to tonight's program. Make sure you share this on your social media account. It's going to be a great episode. Matt, why don't you, Matt Powell, why don't you start us off, man, and just explain what we're going to be talking about tonight?
Sure thing. Well, tonight's going to be a plethora of things. We're going to basically be talking about flood evidence and just real basic things. Once again, like I've always said, we want to put the cookies on the bottom shelf for everybody on the show. And Dr. Raw Matt does a really fine job at doing that. And so I'm really excited about having him on for this interview tonight. And I'm excited that Shane's with us. And it's going to be a great episode. But I actually sent you a link to a video that actually features Dr. Raw Matt. He's going to be one of the main scientists in the new documentary coming out this month, at the end of this month, The Atheist Religion. And so I just sent you a movie preview. And so if we could play that, it kind of introduces Dr. Raw Matt a little bit, and because he's a part of that, and gives us a little background on him, and we'll get the episode rolling.
Awesome. All right. Well, I am pulling it up right now. Again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's program. Make sure you share this. It's going to be a great episode. Here we go.
Dinosaur soft tissue is another example of the scientists ignoring the evidence. Here we have evidence that they're not as old as they say, and yet we're supposed to ignore it. Because obviously, if there's soft tissue, it must last 65 million years because we know dinosaurs were 65 million years ago. Well, are you sure about that? Because the evidence is saying something else. And the truth is, they only accept evidence that lines up with what they've already decided is true, and they ignore the rest. But we're all supposed to just accept that as science because they told us, even though they haven't shown us.
The reason that we lost our hair as apes, because we are apes according to them, the reason we lost our hair is because apes started sewing and making clothes. So they didn't need their hair anymore.
Think about it, people. Logic, come on. Why did it start needing to wear a jacket? An ape today doesn't need a jacket no matter where it lives. It can live in the tropics. You can put it in a zoo in the city. You can put it in the Arctic. They live out in the frost in Japan, up in the high mountains, and they just sit there. They don't need clothes. They didn't invent a jacket and be like, you know what? This looks really cool. I think I'm just going to stay it on. And their dad monkey's like, no, don't do that. You're going to unevolve all your hair, and then we're all going to have to wear clothes one day. That's just ridiculous to think that they started wearing clothes when they don't need them, and that's why we lost our body fur. That's what they believe.
You realize the first part of the scientific method is to make an observation. Has anybody ever observed Grandma Ape knit some clothing together and put it on her little cubs there?
And so, Dr. Raw Matt, thank you so much for coming on to the show tonight. Could you give us just a small introduction about yourself and what you do in the creation science realm?
Yeah, I am part of a team called Standing for Truth. It's a YouTube channel and a team of us young Earth creationists who defend the faith. We have outright attacked atheism and challenged anybody that believes in uniformitarianism. That's the belief of naturalism. That's where nature does everything. You can trust that when nothing exploded and lightning decided to slam into some mud, that all life was created, and then it evolved from bacteria and pond scum into all life on Earth, right? So we challenge that. We make you question evolution. And then by asking questions, we like to make people really question what they really believe to be true. Because the critic is so fast to say, you guys believe in magic, when we know that God disdains magic. But that's how little they actually know, right? They say that we believe in magic, but in reality, they believe in impossibilities, meaning they believe in scenarios that are beyond probable. So therefore, they're not, they're pointing their finger, but, the other fingers are pointing right back at them. They haven't critically looked at what they really believe to be true, because they're too busy mocking and ridiculing what they don't already agree with. And we come out now, this team standing for truth, and we say, wait a minute, there's an alternative to the belief that you've been indoctrinated with. We all went to school and we became indoctrinated to believe one thing, evolution. And now we know that this is not true. So that's what we teamed up and we fight against online.
Incredible. And folks, if you have not subscribed to Standing for Truth, the YouTube channel, I just recommend typing it in. And you can see a lot of their debates, and they have very successful debates. Dr. Raw Matt has had very, very successful debates. And in one instance where a guy tapped out, which I thought was hilarious, personally. And a few instances where the Standing for Truth creationist as well, the man who runs the channel, who's the main guy on the channel, he's anonymous for the sake of his job, but he has done a fabulous job as well at destroying this false science. And so Dr. Raw Matt, in the video we played, it mentioned soft tissue, and we know that in 1990, Dr. Mary Schweitzer discovered this soft tissue, and as well as in 2005. And so with these discoveries, what is a good scientific analysis to conclude about these discoveries?
Well, that's the thing, is when Mary Schweitzer herself found this evidence, she outright denied it herself. And then the first thing she says was that, one, I was excited like on the day of Christmas, and two, I was afraid. Why did she say she was afraid? Because one thing, remember, she's a secular scientist, and she knew that her discovery was so controversial that she would probably lose her job. So what did the evidence really say? That what she found shouldn't exist, because what happens is biological material doesn't exist for millions of years. It can't. It doesn't have the shelf life. It's like putting pickles on the jar, and pulling them out and leaving them on the counter. You're not expecting them to be there next year. They won't be there. But yet that's exactly what we found. We found pickles on the counter that look like you just took them out of the jar yesterday. Doesn't make any sense. So that's what she discovered. And so what happened is that one of the things she discovered was blood tissue. Now, blood cells can't last that long. So she had to save her job. And she said, well, it seems like when you suspend blood in iron, it now can be preserved. So she saved her job. She was able to say, it's okay, blood can last millions of years as long as it's saturated in iron. But it negates all the other problems. You notice they don't like to tell you about the other problems. They just focus on that one because it's the only one that they've resolved. So I like to point at the other problems.
Right on. Excellent answer. And then just curious, because I know that you did a lot of cage fighting and like MMA fighting, and you're a fighter. And I personally think that's awesome. If you look in the Bible, there was men of God that would be able to fight. You think of King David, you think of the kings of Israel, even the Philistines. Like, there were people in the Bible who could really fight. And you had shared with me a few days ago a scientific quote-unquote reason why we grow a beard. Would you mind sharing from an evolutionary standpoint why we have a beard, and then debunk it with the facts?
Yeah, I absolutely love to fight. It was my complete addiction and passion through my entire 20s and probably 30s. But I was reading through studies because it's fascinating to see what the new studies that come out. So this one came out this year, and the study was trying to determine why in the world human beings have such long facial hair. It doesn't make sense that we can grow a beard that goes down basically as long as we want it to, and females really just don't. So what's going on with males? So they hypothesized that, well, the reason must be is because the beard really doesn't have much of a insulator for heat. It really doesn't play much of a factor for that. So the beard probably evolved from being punched in the face. This was their best explanation for why we have beards and why primates don't. So I'm guessing somewhere along the lineage of the split from an ancient ancestor, what happened is our missing link primate, Grandpa Bigfoot, started boxing each other. And during their boxing match, they passed on their boxing to their kids, and then their boxing passed on, and eventually their face was like, I can't tolerate being hit, I'm going to start growing facial hair. That's essentially what they're saying. And the reason that they gave for this is, well, they wrapped a bone in sheep wool and dropped it. And they said, look, the bone didn't break like when you normally drop it. So therefore, fur must protect your bones from breaking. As a fighter, that is the least of your problems. Let me tell you, when you're being punched in the face, I'll backstep a minute. Have you ever watched a boxer walk into the ring? What's the first thing that the coach does? They smear Vaseline right over your eyebrows. Do you know why? Because that's hair. And when you get punched in the face and it hits the hair, your hair is very sharp and it will cut into your skin and you'll bleed into your eye and the fight has to be stopped. So you literally don't, get to box, do anything. You have that fight stopped. Most of the time it's a loss on your record now and you don't get paid. So it's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And I've actually grown facial hair out in a fight. And guess what? I got cut on my chin. It's the only scar that I have on my chin is from hair. It didn't protect me at all. It did the exact opposite thing. It actually was worse. So whoever invented the theory didn't have any logic or any ability to think by, let's see, what would happen if I got punched in the face with a beard? Matter of fact, long hair you can pull. If you were wearing a beard and I pulled guard, meaning I want you to come down to the ground with me, I grabbed your beard, I could pull it all over the place. It's the exact opposite thing you would want. So I'm guessing their rescue device would say, well, that's probably why men started going bald, is because they kept getting their hair pulled. See what I mean?
Could it be like maybe they got it backwards? Maybe it's where they got hit in the face is where the hair stopped growing?
Right. So,
right.
Yeah,
so if you keep getting punched in the face all the time, right, then you'll grow no hair on your face, and so that's how we evolved from the monkeys or whatever they're saying, right?
Well, then we would have no eyebrows. We would have evolved our eyebrows completely away because it's the worst place in the world to put hair on the face. It would be right above the eyes, because you get cut above the eyes, it's going to bleed right into them. Now you can't see when you're fighting. So we would have evolved our eyebrows away first.
Well, nobody said they were smart, so I'm just saying, I'm just making an observation that maybe they went bald because they got punched in the head and it just took all the hair off. It's like shaving, right? So who knows, right?
Right. But you notice today that doesn't happen to primates. So I'm guessing what we need to do as an experiment is take a bunch of chimps and just start blasting them in the face until they start growing beards. And then, boom, proof.
Yeah, because it should be demonstratable,
or they
testable,
turn
and
human.
repeatable. Or they turn into humans.
Yeah. Nonsense, I tell you. Nonsense. Besides, PETA wouldn't allow that to happen anyway. They'd be up in arms. You're punching monkeys in the face in zoos. It wouldn't go over well.
Wow. It's just unbelievable. A lot of this stuff with them trying to use natural selection as a rescue device for something like this, or just saying that this is how our hair grew out on our faces. It's so laughable that it's kind of funny, some of the stuff that they believe. I mean, you've got surfing monkeys, squids coming from outer space, men growing hair on their face as a result of punching to the face. I mean, this stuff is just weird. It's not even just unscientific. It just seems weird, Dr. Allmatt.
Very peculiar. That's why they have to have an explanation for everything that exists, right? So if something like literally somebody asked them, how come we don't have hair on all over our bodies? What kind of sense does that make that our primate ancestors did? and now we have to wear fur to stay warm. Why didn't we just keep our fur? So somebody literally had to go to the drawing board and say, that's a good question. Let's figure that out. Well, maybe they started wearing jackets. What? I mean, like, did they just ask their kid walking by one day, like, what do you think monkeys started doing? I think they wore jackets. Okay, makes sense to me. Boom. I mean, that's the only thing that comes to my mind, because I could come up with a better theory given me 10 minutes. I mean, that's just their rescue devices have gotten to the point where they're laughable. And that's what we're doing now. We're literally laughing at their explanations because they're that ridiculous. Like every month there's a new root common ancestor. If you ever follow the research, it's like, what did we descend from? About 6 months ago, it was a sponge. Do you know why? Because that was found in the lowest layers of rock. Well, later they came along and, it was a stromatolite. Because that was in the lowest layer. Well, last month, guess what? It was a worm. Now we're descended from worms. Worms are the oldest ancestor. Well, guess what? Worms burrow. That's why they're deeper. So they're constantly changing it up. And they say, well, we have to go with the evidence. No, you should go by logic. Logic should come first. If you're seeing this constant pattern of how your theory keeps being falsified, you don't just come up with another rescue device. You should stand back and look at your theory again and question the theory.
It's so funny. These people that question, they'll point out, they'll say presuppositional apologetics. And I'm not really a presuppositionalist, but they will nail presuppositional apologists for believing or having presuppositions. But when it comes to evolution theory, it seems like everything is just built on a presupposition to begin with. Otherwise, why would they use all these rescue devices?
Does like you said that was a study? So does anybody actually really believe this? Like, or are these just theories that they throw out and hope somebody actually takes that as law? Like because like you said, it's kind of hard for it. Just logic. If you just put a logical mind to it, it just makes no sense. But are you saying that people actually believe what you're telling us?
Yeah, this is you can find it by just Googling it, and it comes up as a internet post, from like Wired magazine, which is a scientific journal. Then you go through it and they link the actual scientific peer-reviewed study showing it. Because remember, there's kudos in it for when a scientist comes up with a new discovery or a new theory. And since there isn't one really on facial hair, they're trying to get popular and get grant money and get funding so that they can say, hey, look, it's valid. It's the only theory that's there, and it's the one that makes the most sense. And so, yeah, they want it to take off so that it becomes very popular and they can add it to public textbooks, and then boom, you're rich.
Well, I just Googled it, and it's up on Life Science. Did men's beards evolve to absorb a punch to the jaw? This is ridiculous.
So I got a question. So if they actually get that funding and stuff like that, do they have to prove any of this, like by some kind of scientific experiment, or do they just come up with this theory, they get the funding, and then they just like use the money to try to make us believe it?
That's the question right there. And that's a good question. And here's the answer. The peer-reviewed study literally did that. They took sheep wool and wrapped it around a bone and dropped weight on it. And the bone didn't take as much damage as when it didn't have wool wrapped around it. So that was their evidence to say
that was the science behind it all. That's amazing.
No, it definitely wasn't some primate that they recognized was fighting other primates, and all of a sudden it had like half a centimeter more facial hair, and they're like, oh, maybe that's what's really happening. Oh no, that's the hypothetical. That's what gets injected into their evolutionary belief system, and it must be true until you can prove them wrong. It's like, wait, you haven't even proven it's true. What's going on? These people are they'll believe in Bigfoot and aliens and hollow earth, that we live in a hologram, but creation? No way. That's crazy. I'll believe that monkeys got hit in the face until they grew beards before that.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Top notch, Dr. Raw Matt. Let me ask you this. When it comes to, and I just want to say to the viewers, I had heard you say this, Dr. Raw Matt, and I thought it was awesome. It is shocking that in 2020, with all the information that we have and the ability to Google things, that people even believe in evolution. It is literally shocking that people even just consider it. And it just is mind blowing. How about the global flood? Because obviously you and I would agree that the global flood is scientific 100%. I would go as far as to say that it's a fact. But what are your thoughts on the global flood?
Good. Well, one of the first things I would like to say to answer your first part was that I think the biggest problem is that we never deal with evolution besides when we're out of public education. So we get indoctrinated to learn evolution while we're in school, and then we leave school, and it never comes up again. You never sit down at a coffee table with somebody and be like, so what do you think about the monkey theory today? It never comes up. So people were indoctrinated, and then they just believe it, and then they go about their life, and they never question it. They don't go on Google and they really question anything. And plus, let's say that you were taking a test and you were to write an answer not in your textbook. Well, that's an F. You're going to fail. So it's geared only towards evolution with no other theory allowable. So when it comes to the flood, catastrophism is removed. Anything that's a worldwide calamity has been removed because Charles Lyell, who invented the geologic column, he hated God and he hated anything to do with God. And God was everywhere back when he was alive. It was in all the science textbooks. Everybody believed in young earth creation, and he despised it. So what he did is he said, I need to make the earth look old, and I'm going to do that. And guess what? He wasn't a geologist. He was a lawyer. He literally lived in the city writing, paying people's taxes. So he knew nothing about it. He went out there and he said, I'm going to trick this and I'm going to invent this theory. And I'm just going to say that those layers are millions or billions of years old. So that's what he did. He went out there without any evidence and he just said these layers are layers of time. So he named them by layers of time. So now you can't even say the layers without people thinking of epochs of time. So he did his job. It fooled everybody. And we literally think that when we're looking at the layers, we're looking at layers of time, and that we see more primitive life the lower levels we get. But what we're actually looking at is evidence of the flood in the most basic form you could ever see. Like I was saying, what are in the lowest layers? Well, we have worms. Well, worms, when they're flooded over, they try to survive by actually burrowing. They actually do the opposite of what they probably should do, but they know that they're safer underground. So you're going to find them in the deepest layers. That's exactly what we find. Then we find stromatolites. Now, those are living organisms that are anchored to the ground that look like giant sponges. They don't move either. So what's going to happen in a flood? They're the first to be buried. They can't leave it. Then you're going to get things like trilobites. And then trilobites, what do? They can only crawl. So they're the next to die. Then you get sponges. They're the next to die. And then everything after the sea, water starts to go on land and bury the life there. What do we look at when we look at the geologic chart? We literally see aquatic life that can't move very good at the bottom layers, then the aquatic life that can move, then land life, and then that can't move good, and then land life that can move good, and then birds, right? So we're seeing what exactly we should see if there was a global flood, but they've turned the evidence into their own theory, saying, no, this is proof that we evolved from that worm. That's the problem.
It's incredible. I was watching Bill Nye, and there's this video, I'm sure you've seen it, where it says that the video title on YouTube is Bill Nye Destroys Noah's Ark. And he goes through that point. He'll say, well, there's no instance. The reason we know the flood's a fraud is because there was no instance where one kind of animal would transition. You wouldn't find multiple kinds of animal or families of animals in different layers. You'd find the most prehistoric ones at the bottom and, the more modern ones at the top. Well, hydrologic sorting accounts for all of that. And that's, of course, what we'd expect in a global flood. So, I mean, you basically just took his so-called evidence against the flood and proved that he actually proved the flood while using an oxymoron and saying that he's destroying Noah's Ark, which doesn't make any sense. Guy doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And here's the real problem that he has. First of all, he's never investigated it. If he was to look at the geologic column, what do we find? We find bird tracks before we ever find birds. We find dinosaur tracks before we find dinosaurs. And I'm not just saying like, oh, here's a track and there's no dinosaurs around. No, there's dinosaur tracks, and then there's millions of years of layers, and then there's the dinosaur corpses. Well, where are the corpses with the tracks? They're not there. We find bird foot tracks, no bird carcasses. Where are they? They're in the upper layers because they were outrunning a flood. We find this scenario down the line. We have trilobites that are rolling through millions of years of geologic time, and then the fossil of that trilobite. So you're telling me that trilobite lived for millions of years and then died? Come on, no way. How about dinosaurs that were stomping through the mud, running from the flood like a Tyrannosaurus? I have multiple pictures of this, and then it ran away, and then the layers solidified. Well, now the mud literally is indented with dinosaur tracks stomping through millions of years of geologic time. What are you talking about? That's not possible. Those layers don't bend. It's the dinosaurs running in soft mud, then it turned hard, and now they want to tell us that each of those layers are a million years. It's impossible. This is absolute proof that there was a flood. Simple as that.
That is awesome. Shane, Paul, do you guys got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's just crazy that, people actually believe this. Like, listening to you talk about it, it just seems like just common sense. Like, just apply common sense to the flood and all this stuff that you're saying, and then people are just like, no, it's all wrong. So I just don't understand how people can't just see through the lie.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. Ancient Aliens is real popular right now. It's a TV series that's out, and they actually recognize that there was a worldwide flood. That's what's astonishing. They believe in catastrophism. They said, look at this. There are rocks in the United States that are megalithic rocks, hundreds of thousands of pounds. They don't just get up and they've shown that they didn't roll there. So how did they get there? They said these had to have been moved in a flood. And there's areas where you can see ripple marks still in the ground where there was water that was over 100 feet deep in that region. I mean, they literally proved the flood for us. So that's really good. But we don't need that proof. We literally can walk around and go to dinosaur graveyards around the world. And what do we find? They died in positions of suffocating. Suffocating? What are dinosaurs suffocating? Why is a Tyrannosaurus Rex discovered under 60 feet of mud, died with their head up? That's suffocation. Why was it covered by 60 feet of mud? What could possibly do that other than a flood? Your answer is nothing. So fossils are extremely rare to begin with. And then when we do find them, when they're entirely intact, they died from suffocation. I mean, get real. Come on, people. I mean, there's logic, and then there's like denying. And they're to the point where they actually are denying evidence now. And I'm going over the physical evidence of what we actually look at. I want to tell you the best evidence that we have for the flood is actually in us and in all the animals around us that are alive. It's in their genetics. Now, if I were to say, what is the best evidence for the flood genetically? Well, guess what? The Bible tells us that we descended from Noah and his 3 sons and daughter-in-law. So that means we should come from 3 people. That means we should find 3 major haplogroups in all people. That should go back to that common ancestor. That's exactly what we find. What are the odds of that? That's incredibly rare and incredibly implausible. And from an evolutionary standpoint, nearly impossible. They cannot account for that. There's no possible way. And then to say that there's one Y chromosome that's in all human beings, showing that we descended from a single male, and then it's been tracked. Dr. Jensen from Answers in Genesis, took the high-quality DNA, stretched it out. It's the first time they've ever actually had high sequencing data. He traced it back 4,500 years ago. Then we have the CO1 gene. Inside of you and me and all animals, we all contain mitochondria. And all of that mitochondria all has 37 of the exact same genes. One of those genes is called the CO1. It's a small fragment of an area, and it's only a few hundred base pairs. Now, it's easy to test, and it's really cheap. So the largest study that's ever been done by the Rockefeller University went out, and they tested almost hundreds of thousands of species, not 10, hundreds of thousands. And they determined that 90% of all life that's on Earth went through a bottleneck recently. And now this is the problem. The study also tested fish. Aquatic life died as well. What could do that other than a global flood? Nothing. That's what confused the scientists the most in the study. They're like, we don't see any of these intermediaries that Darwin was talking about. and then we actually find evidence that all 90% of everything that's alive today went through a bottleneck, and that other 10% was living before the bottleneck. So that means 90% of everything that lived before the flood died, 10% lived. How many things went on the ark? Well, that's about 10% of all the life that was needed to replenish the earth, and it did its job. So when we see some extinct animals today, people are like, well, why would God let the animals go extinct? Don't worry about it. They did their job. They replenished the earth for mankind because the earth was made for us. So it's fascinating that we look at that one gene and we see that there's low genetic diversity in all life, and including human beings. And that shouldn't be so if evolution is true, because evolution says that millions of years have passed. Therefore, there would be massive amounts of genetic diversity, and it's not there. So genetics actually proves the flood to be true more than anything else.
That is incredible. That is really incredible. And I appreciate that you take these complicated things, because genetics is a complicated field of science, and you bring it down to where everybody can understand it. And that is just awesome. And yeah, I mean, yep.
No, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. I have never heard of you, Dr. Raw Matt, and you're awesome. I can't wait to check out your YouTube channel, Standing for Truth More. Is there any other way that people can find out more information about you?
Yeah, let's just say that you went to Amazon and you typed in Raw Matt, one word. Our books would pop up, and you can find us that way as well. I try to make our content free, and it is. But we also have books so that more people can find us and kind of support us at the same time, even though there's actually no support, because my books actually are at cost. It's however much Amazon actually wants to charge. So wow. I can't literally charge less because that's how much it costs them to print the book. But essentially, we have as many books as we can put out there, trying to cover as many topics as possible. We started writing last year, and we have a lot of books covering most of the major topics that are out there that confuse people, like human evolution. Standing for Truth wrote that one, refuting the critics, any of their objections that come up. You know, we try to write in a layman thing, but when we get into books like Refuting the Critics, it gets really technical, because the only critics that exist come from the evolutionary biologists. So they're coming in with technical questions, and we answer them in a technical way. But that's another way you can find us. But just typing in Raw Matt on YouTube, you can find my channel, but it's very small. It's what I post very seldomly. But most of the content that I make goes funneled right to Standing for Truth.
Okay, so now the books that you write, is it you that write? Because you said we. Is it you, or is it a group of you guys that write them?
We take turns. I wrote one in particular. This monster right here. That one's good.
Oh, wow.
It's just called the Young Earth Creation Model. And then I write. We break our work up because we're busy. You know what I mean? I make videos and.
Well, it's very time consuming to write a book. So I can only imagine.
Yeah, so we kind of split it up. My next one coming out, I could even post it even tonight if I wanted to. It's debunking R and Raw's entire flood series. I take every word he says out and I turn it into a book, and I debunked every phrase and statement that he makes. That'll be a fun one. I'm still trying to think of a title name. That's why I haven't released it. And so while I'm doing that, he's Standing for Truth is working on the human evolution one and debunking Neanderthals being monkeys and stuff like that, right? So he's debunking that. I'm debunking something else. So we're, as a team, we're not writing books with each other. We're actually individually writing our own, just to make it easier. Yeah, we tried teaming up and writing a single book together, but we wrote a lot of the same thing twice, and it became a mess. It was more work than it was work.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I really appreciate you coming on the program today and talking with us. It's been a fun episode, man. So what are some of the main reasons people even believe in evolution? Because, you know, I just can't even none of it made sense, because I was raised in a Christian home, so it doesn't make sense to me at all. But why do people believe in evolution?
Because evolution is a vague word. It means change. It literally just means change. So when they say, well, do you believe things change? Well, yeah. Therefore, you believe in evolution, right? And then when you say, well, I don't believe that a land mammal, little walking creature turned into a whale, and they'll just say, well, you believe things change. Why can't you believe, given enough time, things can change that much? So See what I mean? It's just they're trying to say it's a possibility that things could. So if you use your imagination enough, it's a possibility. It's kind of like the theory that monkeys can type Shakespeare, right? If you give enough time and enough monkeys, it'll eventually happen, right? That's their theory. If you allow for infinity with an infinite amount of monkeys, they'll eventually type Shakespeare. That's their mindset going in. And we'll ignore the part where that's actually been tried in a study and failed completely. But in reality, that's what they believe. So theirs is a belief system that goes by the simplistic law of, well, things do change, so therefore evolution is true. It's a very rudimentary form of belief. That's all. And their system relies on mutation to take it. But since mutations don't do the change that they require in a time scale that's reasonable, they have to invoke millions and millions and millions of years, because evolution can't be true on the short scale. It has to have time to work. And since that's not testable, observable, or repeatable, it's literally not science. That's it.
Yeah, so you have to learn this stuff from a young age and to believe it. I mean, you have to be taught this at a young age, because it doesn't make sense if you just you're just learning about it for the first time as an adult.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get into it and you start getting in and you start arguing with the people about it, they're like, well, why couldn't it work? It's kind of like you're trying to defeat a negative statement. It's like, well, first of all, you have to explain why it does work. You're not doing it. You point to the Linsky experiment, which was just a bunch of bacteria that was put in different environments. And they said, look at it evolve. And all it did is go through massive reductive evolution. It was throwing genes away just to survive. It was cornering itself to live in just that specific environment. 50% of them are dead. The other 50% specifically epigenetically adapted to that one environment so it would survive. And then if they're removed, they'll die instantly. So their fitness went up a little bit, and everyone was, hurrah, hurrah, it's proof of evolution. They adapted to their environment. It's like, I'm sorry, guys, that's not how this works. You need those bacteria to not only adapt to that environment, but then be better than they were before to show that something like a bacteria-like ancestor can branch into all forms of life. You see, when Darwin wrote his book, he drew a single tree of life, and everything came from that single root ancestor. He didn't know what it was, but it didn't really matter. He just said that that's where it all came from. They've been trying to prove that ever since, and just recently that's been falsified. It's no longer a single Darwinian tree of life. Now it's a 3-tiered domain bush of life. So the more time passes, the more it's going to turn into a creation model, and they'll be unable to defend it eventually. The more they falsify themselves over and over and over, eventually they won't be able to keep sweeping it under the rug, because people like me are just going to see it. They're going to post it for everybody to see, and they won't be able to hide and be like, oh no, how embarrassing. Like in the 1960s, Ernest Mayr came out and said, did you know that because evolution is true, of course, it's a fact, that animals today, when we learn about the genome and we learn about everything and what's going on, we're going to learn that no life alive today shares any commonality at all, because evolution has been going on for millions of years. Well, guess what? When we looked in the genome, we share tons of genes and everything, the genome, with all life on Earth. So something that actually falsified the theory is now used as the best evidence for the theory, when in reality, that's what it did. It falsified it. It completely proved they were wrong. But now, see, they twisted it. They U-turned and said, see, that proves we come from a common ancestor because we share all of these things together. See what they do? They sweep it under the rug, they hide from it, and they twist the information to make it sound like it's always been in their case. The information and the evidence has always been on their side when it's not. You know that Darwin, when he went to the Galapagos Islands and he saw the Darwinian the finches that are named after him, the Darwin finches, he literally went over there and said, well, if evolution's true, then I predict my finches are going to speciate one time every 3,000 years. That was his prediction. What do we know today about those Darwin finches? They speciate once every 3.3 years. That's how fast speciation is actually happening. Completely contradictory to what he said it would be based on evolutionary timescales. So evolution just doesn't work, because what they say happens and what needs to happen doesn't happen in the real world. What we're seeing is fast speciation rates, and that's exactly what we see. You see, if the Ark literally landed 4,500 years ago and all these animals came off of it, well, how many bird species are there today? Well, how many were on the Ark? It says that if Noah took all the different bird families, he would have brought about 245 bird families on the Ark. And from that, they would have started speciating, and they would have branched around the world. Well, we only have about 10 to 20,000. But if evolution was true, and you go back 200,000 years to their last worldwide bottleneck, and there's a speciation event for each of those birds, let's just say that only one, in favor of evolution, by the way, let's just say that one bird lived in the from the worldwide bottleneck 200,000 years ago, and that one bird mated with another, the pair survived and they mated. Well, if you get a bird species going every 3.3 years from those, you're going to get a number of bird species that is far beyond 10,000 to 20,000. I'm sorry. You're going to get thousands, 100,000 bird species, and that's not what we see. And that would be if we only reduce them to one bird pair. I mean, the evidence is so much against evolution when it comes to speciation rates. You can literally go online and type in lizard, and you see there's about 4,700 different types of lizard species. Well, how many lizards were on the Ark? Only a couple pair. They came off, they started speciating. That's exactly what we see. The numbers line up exactly with what we would expect. But again, if evolution was true and lizards are speciating once every year, over 200,000 years, you would get 200,000 or more lizards. Far more than that if more than one lizard pair survived, which of course there would have been. And that's not what we see. So I'm sorry, just everything that I look at shows creation to be true and invalidates evolution. Invalidates it. So the mechanism that pushes evolution forward isn't true. The observations aren't true. When we look at the flood, everywhere we look, from geology to how about when we start looking at the King's List. Have you ever heard of this before? It's a heritage list that goes back to Britain. They discovered that the royalty in Britain has always been in the family. They interbreed. They marry their first cousins. The reason why is because they keep it in the family lineage as much as possible. Well, that makes it really easy to track lineage. Did you know you can track the British King's List all the way back to Adam?
Incredible. That is literally incredible. I mean, you have literal proof in front of your eyes. And I feel like at the end of the day, like, the Bible is something that I accept by faith, but oh man, there are so many things that you can prove. Like, you can literally prove a young Earth. You can scientifically prove that man and dinosaurs lived together. You can scientifically prove a flood. I mean, they say, where's your evidence? Where's your evidence? I don't need to provide you evidence. I can provide you proof. You just heard it right here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Allmatt, let me ask you this. I've heard in debates where people will cry out, and this will probably be our last question because we want to keep this episode short because we'd like to have you on again.
Okay.
There are people who will claim that it takes millions of years for evolution to occur, and that these change of allele frequencies over time will result in change of, you'll change from certain animal families to different animal families. So my question to you would be, how would you respond to somebody who cries out? I heard somebody say, we need more time, Kent. We need more time. Right. What do you do when they ask for more time?
I would just say, no, you need more time. I don't need more time, because we say that a change happens because of recombination and gene conversion. These are rapid. These happen very quickly. It's why if you had 1,000 children, not a single one would look identical to one another, because recombination is occurring in the genome, and every single kid that you have is going to be different. So yes, there's changes that are occurring, and they're rapid changes, but they're not the type of changes that evolution needs to be true. You're never going to have a child that's born with wings. So they need mutations to happen to do that. So they need vast amounts of time for a wing to form. For a mutation to form, you need a gene that needs to arise to form this wing. And then the wing has to know that it's got purpose. Half of a wing is useless. So it has to have forward thinking. Evolution isn't forward thinking. It doesn't do that. It's not a thought thing. If it doesn't work, it's going to get rid of it. Selection's going to remove it. It's going to say, this is worthless. I'm expending energy on something that my body doesn't need right now. I got to get rid of it. So unless evolution can happen instantly, it's not true. And we don't see it happening instantly. What we do see is rapid variation within kinds. And then there are limits on what happens within these kinds. Probably the most diverse animal that you could ever find would be the equids or the deer. You find lots of different variety in them, and they go through massive rapid recombination in the genome. They need more time for their fairy tale to be true. We don't. We see rapid change because we believe in recombination and gene conversion. That's the mechanism that we believe works because that's what we see, that's what we observe, that's what we test, and that's what we can repeat in studies. They say, no, mutations did it. We go, where's the evidence? Well, we don't need it because time, because deep time. It's like, well, you just admitted yours is pseudoscience. I'm sorry. You just admitted it.
Amen and amen. Dr. Raw, Matt, thank you so much for coming onto the show. And Shane, thank you so much for being with Paul and I today. What did you think of it?
It's great. It's good. Lots of good information. Another, Matt, the other Matt is very informative. I'm curious to see him. We're going to have him on.
The other Matt,
right? The other Matt, right? So we're gonna, like you said, we're gonna have him on again. So I'm curious to see, as we move forward in this series, just how it evolves, I guess, right?
Yeah, Matt, thank you. Raw Matt, thank you so much for coming on this program, man. You're awesome. I can't wait to get you back on.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man. And here's a question that I've seen arise in the last few comment sections. And I just wanted to throw it out there for everybody that's listening right now. That's a critic. They're going to say, well, why should I trust the Bible? And I tell them, you don't have to. You can put the Bible to the scientific test and it passes with flying colors. And then you'll believe it.
Amen. That is awesome. Folks, this is episode 7 of Answers in Creation. And I just want to say in closing, before we close this thing out, Dr. Raw Matt has really helped my scientific background. He's actually helped not only my personal scientific background, and he's mentored and coached me in this specific area, but he's also played a key role in this new film we've got coming out, The Atheist Religion. And when this movie comes out, folks, make sure you share it with your friends, because a lot of the things that you heard tonight, you're going to hear them amplified and in high quality HD with music and cinematically.
Dude, that trailer was awesome. I just watched it for the first time tonight, and great job, Matt.
Amen.
I love that outside interview. It turned out good, huh?
It actually did. It's funny because when you came over and filmed it, I was skeptical of doing it. I know you were skeptical of doing it outdoors, but we did it, and it looked great.
I thought so, yeah. Cool.
So,
well, awesome. Thank you, Matt, for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right,
I'll come back anytime.
God bless, man.
Nice.
All right, that was Dr. Raw Matt, creation scientist, really nice guy. Can't wait to get him back on the program. Guys, make sure you head over to our backup channels on BitChute and Brighteon. We are getting censored here on Framing the World quite heavily, and so we need you guys to go and subscribe to those channels. You can also support us by going to our Patreon account and donating through that as well. Matt, good job getting him on the program tonight, man. That was a great guess.
Thank you so much. And I just want to mention real fast before we close, Aaron Ra will often talk about myself or Kent Hovind, and he seems to really want to come after us when he knows that myself and Dr. Hovind, we're not very familiar. Well, we're familiar with phylogeny, but it's not something that we specialize in. He never mentions Dr. Raw Matt. Now, we're always mentioning him too, Aaron, but he won't even say his name because Aaron knows that in a debate, it would be a smackdown from the beginning. Dr. Raw Matt would win the debate in the opening
Hands
statement.
down, man. He wouldn't even make it past round one.
And grow a beard while he's at it, right?
That would be amazing. So that's a challenge to you, Aaron. Actually, I would say if you wanted to come on my channel, and have a debate with Dr. Raw Matt, if Raw Matt agreed to it, if I could talk him into it and I could talk you into it, I would be happy to moderate something like that. But at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to do it because he wrote a whole book falsifying your claims, and you know that you have nothing. And so at the end of the day, folks, creation science is science. And this was episode 7. And thank you so much, Paul, for what you do and putting this show together.
Yeah, man, it's been fun. And you know what? Evolution is dumb.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us here tonight. And thank you, Shane, for coming all the way from Canada.
My pleasure.
To join us on
I'm just
this
glad
episode.
to be here. I love doing these shows, so
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, we like to keep you up all night and then send you off to drive all day back to Canada.
That's how I roll, right?
All right, thanks, Matt, and thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you share this video and get the word out about Dr. Raw Matt. Also, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Standing for Truth. Again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Answers in Creation, Episode 7. God bless, guys.
Subscribe to our BitChute and Brighton channels. Check the description. Nice. Subscribe now.